You check the email. It is the promotion you've been working toward for 3 years. The salary is higher. The title is exactly what you wanted.
Yeah.
But instead of celebrating, your stomach drops. You suddenly feel this overwhelming urge to close your laptop, walk away, and maybe just ignore it until next week.
Right.
It is a bizarre, deeply confusing reaction. You finally get the exact thing you have been striving for, and your body reacts like it is under an active threat.
Oh, absolutely.
It is the quiet, heavy tension of realizing that getting what you want means your entire reality is about to shift. It means the safety of your current life is gone.
It's terrifying.
I mean, I have felt this exact sensation, and it is so deeply unsettling. You set the goals, you do all the work, you grind for years, and then the moment the finish line is right there, or the moment you actually cross it, this overwhelming instinct kicks in to just hit the brakes.
Yeah, to pull back completely.
Exactly. To suddenly find a reason why you shouldn't take the opportunity.
And the thing is, people rarely admit to feeling this way because on paper, it sounds, completely irrational.
Totally.
We are conditioned by society to believe that success is just a pure reward. You work hard, you get the prize, you feel happy. But psychologically, success is a massive systemic disruption.
Right.
It instantly alters the expectations placed on you. It shifts the dynamic of your relationships. I mean, it fundamentally changes who you are and how you relate to the world.
Which is exactly why I wanted to get into the sources we have today, the psychological data, the clinical strategies, and especially this incredible 2023 CUNY dissertation on the modern workplace.
Such a good study.
It really is. Because I think we all have this vague notion that we sometimes hold ourselves back. But looking at the actual neuroscience of why we do it, why our brains treat a massive victory the same way they treat a physical threat, it completely changes how you view your own behavior.
It reframes everything.
Yeah. But before we get into the brain scanners and the modern workplace data, I want to understand how long we've known about this. Because, I mean, this feeling of running from our own potential isn't a new consequence of corporate hustle culture, is it?
Oh, no, not at all. Psychologists have been observing this for decades. To really grasp the foundation of this, we have to go back to the mid-20th century, specifically to Abraham Maslow.
Okay, the hierarchy of needs guy.
Right, exactly. Work your way up to self-actualization at the top.
Right.
But Maslow noticed a glaring problem in his patients. Even when people had all their basic needs met, they actively resisted reaching the top of the pyramid. They fought against their own self-actualization.
Wait, so they were actively choosing not to reach their full potential?
Precisely. Maslow was fascinated by this, and he discussed it with his friend, Professor Frank E. Manuel. Manuel actually suggested a name for this phenomenon that stuck perfectly. He called it the Jonah complex.
The Jonah complex. Like Jonah, as in the biblical story, the guy who gets swallowed by the whale.
The very same. In the story, Jonah isn't just an average guy. He's called to prophesy the destruction of the city of Nineveh.
Oh, yeah.
That is his ultimate destiny, his highest possible calling in his reality. But instead of stepping up to his potential, he is terrified. He flees in the exact opposite direction.
Which ultimately lands him in the belly of the whale.
Exactly. And Maslow used this as a powerful metaphor for the human condition. The Jonah complex is clinically defined as the fear of success. It is the evasion of one's own destiny and the active avoidance of exercising one's unique talents.
But why? What is so terrifying about your own talents? Like, let's say you're an incredible writer or a brilliant manager or a gifted artist. What possesses someone to look at that gift and say, no thanks, I'd rather stay in the belly of the whale where it's dark and damp?
Well, Maslow outlined a few core psychological drivers that are incredibly resonant. The first is the sheer crushing weight of responsibility. Right. If you finally admit to yourself and to the world that you are highly capable, you are suddenly on the hook to produce highly capable work every single day. The grace period of being just okay is over.
Oh, that makes complete sense. If you're the underdog, people are pleasantly surprised when you do well. But if you accept that you are the expert, doing well is the bare minimum expectation.
Exactly. The baseline moves. The second driver is the fear of xenophobic rejection.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, in human history, being extraordinary is dangerous. If you live an extraordinary life, you are no longer ordinary, you stand out. And if you stand out from the tribe, you risk being ostracized by the tribe.
Wow.
Yeah. There's also the fear of seeming arrogant, which we often confuse with confidence. And finally, Maslow noted that many people simply cannot envision themselves as authoritative figures. When they close their eyes, they literally cannot picture themselves sitting in the big chair. It causes profound cognitive dissonance.
This instantly makes me think of that famous Marianne Williamson quote. It's referenced in one of our sources by Nina Amir, and you see it printed on coffee mugs and inspirational posters everywhere. Our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure.
Oh, yeah, it's a culturally pervasive quote. And it captures the essence of the Jonah complex perfectly.
But I'm going to push back on that quote a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Because I know it sounds beautiful, it's poetic, but practically speaking, for you and me navigating a Tuesday afternoon at work, is it actually true? Do people walk around terrified of their own power? Or are they just terrified of the extra emails, the endless meetings, and the sheer exhaustion that comes with a higher title?
Right.
Let me try an analogy here.
Yeah.
It's like winning a luxury sports car on a game show. At first, the confetti falls, and you're thrilled. You have this amazing, powerful car. But then, on the drive home, the dread sets in. You realize you now have to pay for premium gas, exorbitant insurance, and specialized maintenance you can't afford. So do we fear the car itself, or do we just fear the upkeep?
That is a very sharp analogy. And the reality is that it's a combination of both, but perhaps not in the way you might think.
Okay, tell me more.
We absolutely fear the upkeep. That's the responsibility Maslow is talking about. But we also fear what driving that car does to our social standing. The Jonah complex highlights a massive blind spot we have, an inability to differentiate humility from self-helplessness.
Wait, unpack that. Humility versus self-helplessness.
Yes. Many people subconsciously believe that staying small, driving the beaten-up sedan, and keeping their head down is a form of moral humility. They think, oh, I don't want to show off. But it's not humility, it's self-helplessness. It's a defense mechanism. If you excel, you stand out. If you stand out, you might be rejected by your friends who are still driving regular sedans. You fear the upkeep, yes, but more deeply, you fear the isolation of greatness. If you become powerful beyond measure, who are your peers? Who is going to relate to you?
That is heavy. It's not just the extra work, it's the potential loss of your entire social circle.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to make sure we are categorizing this correctly as we move forward. Because in the corporate world, or even just online, people throw around terms like fear of failure and imposter syndrome all the time.
Constantly.
They treat them like they are all the exact same thing. But they aren't, are they? If we want to solve this, we need to distinguish fear of success, what the literature calls FOS, from these other hurdles. Because to the average listener right now, anxiety is just anxiety.
You're right. They feel identical in the body. You know, the racing heart, the tight chest, the urge to flee.
Yeah.
But the psychological triggers and the underlying motivations are fundamentally different. Let's break them down clearly, starting with fear of failure, or FOF. Fear of failure is activated when an opportunity to fail becomes a real possibility. It is entirely driven by shame. It's the terror of disappointing others, looking incompetent, and the subsequent devastating drop in your own self-esteem. You are avoiding the negative consequences of a negative outcome.
That one is intuitive. Nobody wants to publicly faceplant. But what about imposter syndrome? How does the literature separate that from just being afraid to fail?
Well, imposter phenomenon, which is the original clinical term, is highly specific. It is the persistent, internalized feeling of fraudulence.
Feeling like a fake.
Exactly. And it specifically affects high-achieving individuals. These are people who have undeniable objective proof of their success, degrees, awards, promotions, but they fundamentally believe their success is an accident. They attribute it to luck, charm, or timing rather than their actual intellectual ability.
So they succeed, but their brain refuses to accept the credit. I know our sources mentioned the Harvey scale from 1981 and the Clance imposter phenomenon scale from 1985. But how do psychologists actually measure something as subjective as feeling like a fraud? What are they looking for?
That's a great question. The Clance scale, for instance, doesn't just ask, do you feel like an imposter? It measures specific behavioral and cognitive patterns. It asks individuals to rate statements like, I can give the impression that I'm more competent than I really am, or I often worry that people will find out I'm not as smart as they think I am.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The scales measure what we call perceived discrepancy. That's the mathematical gap between your external achievements and your internal self-worth. People with high imposter scores suffer from chronic perfectionism, depression, and burnout. They work themselves to the absolute bone, not to achieve a goal, but to prevent anyone from discovering their secret.
Right, they are running from a ghost. Okay, so fear of failure is running away from a bad outcome. Imposter syndrome is achieving a good outcome, but living in terror that it was a mistake. So where exactly does fear of success fit into this triad?
Fear of success is activated when success becomes likely. It's not the fear that you will fail. It's not the fear that you are a fraud. It is a paralyzing, agonizing ambivalence about choosing to accept success, specifically because you are anticipating the negative repercussions of that success.
The isolation, the responsibility.
Yes, it is the fear of the target changing, the expectations rising, and the social isolation we discussed earlier.
Okay, let me try to map this out with a physical scenario so the listener can really feel the mechanical difference between these three.
Sure, go ahead.
Imagine you are standing at the edge of a high diving board at a public pool. Fear of failure is looking down at the water, imagining doing a massive, painful belly flop, and walking back down the ladder because you don't want people to laugh at you. Imposter syndrome is standing on the board, executing a dive, but feeling like you somehow sneaked past the lifeguards to get there, and any second now, security is going to blow a whistle and kick you out.
Both of those map perfectly to the psychology.
All right, so for fear of success, is it standing on the board realizing you have the ability to do a flawless Olympic-level dive, but deciding not to do it because you're afraid they'll force you to join the Olympic team and your whole life will become about diving?
Consciously, that is how we rationalize it to ourselves. We say, oh, I don't want the workload. But biologically, the mechanism of FOS goes much deeper and is far more subconscious.
Really?
Yeah. Fear of success is when you are midair, currently executing that flawless dive, and your subconscious brain realizes that if you enter the water perfectly, your baseline reality is permanently changed. You will forever be expected to dive perfectly.
Oh.
And your brain doesn't know how to survive in that new high expectation reality. So, midair, it forcibly twitches your muscles. It sabotages your form to ensure you splash awkwardly. It actively destroys the dive to return you to the familiar, comfortable safety of just being average.
Wow. Okay, that is terrifying. Your own brain hijacks your body midair to ruin the dive.
Exactly.
This is where this topic gets incredibly fascinating to me.
Yeah.
We've established what these fears are, but how does the brain actually do that? Why does human biology react to a positive outcome, like a perfect dive or a massive promotion, with absolute heart-pounding panic? To understand that, we have to look under the hood at the neurobiology of self-sabotage.
And this requires completely rethinking how you view your own mind. In popular culture, we tend to think of the brain as a pleasure-seeking machine, constantly hunting for the next dopamine hit, right? We think our brains want us to be happy and successful. But from an evolutionary standpoint, the brain is a prediction machine first and a pleasure machine second. Its primary overarching job is not to make you happy. Its job is to keep you alive. And the only way it can keep you alive is if it can predict exactly what is going to happen next.
It craves certainty above everything else, even above happiness.
Exactly. Uncertainty equals death in the primitive brain. To navigate the chaotic world, your brain establishes a flat line of competence, worth, and safety. Let's call this your internal baseline. It represents exactly how good or how bad your brain expects things to be based on your past experiences.
Okay, I follow.
Now, when your external reality suddenly moves away from this baseline, even if it moves in a wonderfully positive direction, like sudden success, a massive promotion, or even just a deeply heartfelt compliment, it tears open a gap between what the brain predicted and what is actually happening.
And the brain absolutely hates gaps.
It despises them. In neuroscience, this gap is known as a prediction error. To the primitive reptilian parts of your brain, a prediction error is not a pleasant surprise. It is a signal of dangerous uncertainty.
Okay.
When that gap opens, the threat detection center of your brain, the amygdala, sounds a massive alarm. It initiates what we call an amygdala hijack. It floods your nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline. It literally shoves the rational, logical part of your brain out of the driver's seat, takes the wheel, and triggers a full-blown fight-or-flight response.
Stop and think about what this means for a second. Your biological hardware is reacting to an email offering you a promotion the exact same way it would react to a predator jumping out of the bushes.
Yes.
Simply because the promotion wasn't part of its expected familiar baseline. That is wild.
It is wild, but biologically it is highly efficient. The uncertainty of the new role registers as a literal threat to your survival. Now, normally we have a biological mechanism to stop ourselves from panicking over good news.
Oh, thank goodness. What is it?
There is a region in the brain called the right inferior frontal gyrus, or the RIFG. The RIFG acts as the brain's brake pedal. When the amygdala freaks out, the RIFG sends inhibitory signals to calm the system down. It says, hey, it's just an email, not a tiger, relax.
So if we have a brake pedal, why do we still self-sabotage?
Because in people who are prone to self-sabotage or who have experienced trauma or chronic stress, this neural pathway, this brake pedal, is what neuroscientists describe as soft.
Soft.
Yeah. Imagine driving a car and pressing the brake, but the pedal feels like it's covered in a thick layer of sponge. It doesn't grip. It requires immense, exhausting, conscious willpower to engage that brake and stop the panic. And usually, the amygdala wins.
To bring this back to everyday technology, it's like your brain is an overly aggressive autocorrect on your phone.
Oh, I love that.
You're trying to type a beautiful, complex new word into your life, a word like success or love or promotion. But your internal software freaks out because that word isn't in its familiar dictionary. So it sourceably autocorrects you back to a familiar basic word like mediocrity or failure or rejection because it feels safer. It knows how to spell failure. It has survived failure 100 times before.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. You are autocorrecting your own life. And this is the mechanical explanation for why we sabotage. Self-sabotage is not a character flaw. It is a biological strategy deployed by you against you to close that terrifying prediction error gap.
Wow.
When you ruin the opportunity, you return to the familiar baseline. You retreat to the familiar pain of not being good enough. Your brain fundamentally prefers predictable failure over the terrifying, unmapped territory of uncertain success.
Okay, so if the brain's prediction machine is universal human hardware, does that mean everyone fears success equally? Are we all doomed to aggressively autocorrect ourselves? Or are certain people more at risk? Because for a long time, the psychological community had a very specific and honestly a pretty stereotypical view of who suffered from this.
They absolutely did. And this brings us to one of the most important sources in our stack today, the 2023 CUNY dissertation by Dr. Bradley E. Gray. This research is a massive paradigm shift because it completely shatters decades-old assumptions about who fears success and why they do it.
Right, because if we look at the old theories, mostly pioneered by researchers like Martina Horner back in the late 60s and 70s, fear of success was largely treated as a women's issue.
Yes. Horner's original framework theorized that FOS was almost exclusively a female-specific problem, driven by sex role socialization and cultural concepts of femininity.
Interesting.
The idea was that women in the 60s and 70s feared social ostracism for succeeding in what were traditionally considered male-dominated roles. The psychological community also theorized that people who feared success had an external locus of control.
Meaning they felt like victims of circumstance, that life just happened to them.
Right. And that they inherently suffered from low self-esteem.
So the old psychological profile was essentially, you're a woman, you lack confidence, and you don't think you're in control of your own life, therefore you shrink away from success. But Dr. Gray's modern data completely destroys that profile, doesn't it?
It turns it entirely upside down. Gray gathered comprehensive qualitative and quantitative data from the modern workforce across multiple industries, and the findings are striking. First and foremost, fear of success affects men and women equally. There is zero statistical difference based on gender.
Okay, good to know.
Furthermore, there is no industry immunity and there is no job-level immunity.
Yeah.
CEOs and senior executives experience this biological panic just as intensely as entry-level employees.
And the personality profile of the success fear was completely wrong, too. Gray found that the people most likely to fear success actually have an internal locus of control. They fiercely believe they control their own lives. And they often have high self-esteem, even if it is a bit fragile or dependent on performance.
Exactly. This is the most counterintuitive part of the research.
Let's pause and unpack that internal locus of control finding, because I know listeners are scratching their heads right now. If I believe I am in the driver's seat of my destiny, shouldn't I be less afraid of success? If I'm in control, I should feel empowered to climb the ladder, right? Why does taking ownership of your life make you more terrified of reaching your potential?
It seems like a paradox, but when you look at the mechanics of responsibility, it makes perfect sense. Because you believe you are completely in control of your outcomes, you feel the crushing absolute weight of the responsibility that comes with success.
Ah, I see.
Think about it. If you believe life just happens to you, an external locus of control, and you fail at a new promotion, you can brush it off. You can blame the economy. You can blame your terrible boss. You can blame bad luck. Your ego is safe.
Right.
But if you have an internal locus of control, if you take that massive promotion and you fail at that new, higher altitude, you have no one to blame but yourself. It is all on you. You control your destiny, which means you intimately own your failures.
Oh, man. That is
Good.
so heavy. The stakes are infinitely higher because there is no scapegoat. It's a direct reflection of your core worth.
Yes. And beyond that crushing responsibility, Gray identified 3 specific modern core drivers in the workplace that trigger this fear. We need to look at these closely. The first is the need for affiliation.
Need for affiliation. How does that hold us back?
Well, humans are deeply social creatures.
Yeah.
The need for affiliation is the deep-seated fear of losing meaningful relationships, missing out on family time, or alienating your coworkers if you move up the hierarchy. Gray's study looked heavily at organizational identification. If you highly value your work culture and you feel closely tied to your peers, you eat lunch with them, you complain about upper management with them, you might actively reject a promotion to management.
Because you don't want to suddenly become the person that you're complaining about.
Exactly. You prioritize the social bond over your own career advancement.
Think about your own office right now. Have you ever stayed quiet in a meeting or held back a brilliant idea because you didn't want your favorite coworker to look bad? Have you ever downplayed an achievement because you wanted to stay one of the gang? That is the need for affiliation in action. You are shrinking to fit the social container.
Precisely. Which leads directly into Gray's second core driver, the fear of being envied. Outperformers fear being the target of a threatening upward social comparison.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you get the corner office and the massive bonus, you anticipate hostility, resentment, or awkwardness from the people who didn't get it. You become a walking, talking mirror that reflects their own inadequacies back at them, and you know they will resent you for it.
And the third driver?
Identity threat. This is incredibly common in highly specialized fields. It is the fear that accepting a role that is deeply tied to your core identity, say, transitioning from being a hobbyist writer to a published author, or from a medical student to an attending physician, carries a catastrophic risk.
Which is?
If you try it and fail, it destroys your fundamental sense of self. If you never take the leap, you can always protect the fantasy that you could have been great.
It's the ultimate protective fantasy. I could have been a genius if I just tried. Once you actually try, you risk finding out you're only average. So we know who fears success. Highly capable, responsible people who deeply value their relationships and their identities. And we know why their brain triggers the biological alarm. But now we need to look at the dark side of this.
The really dark side.
Yeah. How does this fear actually manifest in our daily behavior? How do we actively destroy our own path? Because we don't usually just walk into our boss's office, sit down and say, "Hi, my amygdala is experiencing a prediction error, and I'm terrified of my own potential. Please don't promote me." We don't do that. We do sneaky, destructive things instead.
We engage in a complex behavioral pattern that psychologists Edward E. Jones and Stephen Berglass termed self-handicapping. It is a cognitive strategy where you actively avoid effort or create obstacles in order to protect your self-esteem by altering causal attributions.
Altering causal attributions. Let's translate that into conversational English. What does that actually mean?
It means you are rewriting the story of why you failed in advance so your ego doesn't have to take the hit. If you try your best and fail, the cause is a lack of ability. That hurts. If you create an obstacle and fail, the cause is the obstacle. Your ability remains unquestioned.
You give yourself an out. And according to the research, there are 2 primary ways we execute this self-handicapping, right?
Yeah. Yes. The first is behavioral handicapping. This is the physical execution of sabotage. This is when you actually create tangible, logistical obstacles for yourself.
Like what?
You procrastinate on a major presentation until the absolute last minute. You go out drinking the night before a crucial job interview. You stay up until 3 a.m. scrolling on your phone or playing video games before a massive exam. You deliberately refuse to practice your pitch.
Wow.
Interestingly, the psychological research shows that males are statistically much more inclined to use behavioral self-handicapping than females.
Okay, I understand the behavioral stuff. Procrastinating, drinking, staying up late. But what about people who don't necessarily self-destruct physically? What if someone prepares, but they still manage to ruin their chances through sheer negativity? Is there a cognitive version of this?
Yes, that is the second type. Claimed handicapping. This is when you don't necessarily create a physical obstacle, but you heavily broadcast that an obstacle exists before the performance even begins.
Oh, I see.
You verbally lay the groundwork for failure. You make up excuses beforehand. You claim you have a terrible migraine or a sudden stomach ache. Or you walk around the office loudly declaring to anyone who will listen, I am just so overwhelmed, I haven't slept in weeks, my brain is fried.
You are lowering everyone's expectations before you even step up to the plate. This connects perfectly to Martin Covington's self-worth theory from our sources, the idea that we treat school and the corporate workplace as a zero-sum scoring system. Can you explain how Covington viewed effort? Because I found this fascinating.
Covington's theory is crucial for understanding the tragic logic of self-sabotage. In a highly competitive, zero-sum environment, effort is a terrifying double-edged sword. Think about how we judge people. If you try your absolute hardest, if you give 100% of your energy and you still fail, what is the assumption?
That you just aren't good enough.
The assumption is that you are fundamentally unintelligent or untalented. You maxed out your potential and it wasn't enough. That is a devastating, almost unrecoverable blow to the ego.
It proves you aren't good enough.
Exactly. So students and employees use self-handicapping to offer a plausible external excuse like fatigue, a hangover, or a headache, rather than face that terrifying possibility.
It's brilliant, really, in a dark, twisted way.
Yeah.
It's like setting up a rigged casino where the house, which is your ego, always wins.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Think about the math on this. If you handicap yourself by staying up all night playing video games, and you fail the exam the next day, you get to say to yourself, well, I'm not stupid, I just failed because I was tired. Your ego is completely protected.
Right.
But if you handicap yourself, stay up all night, and you somehow succeed, you get to say, wow, I am an absolute genius. I aced that exam on zero sleep without even trying. The ego wins either way. It's a flawless psychological defense mechanism.
In the short term, it is highly effective.
Yeah.
And we see this mirrored in the clinical data from Charlie Health regarding defense mechanisms. Self-handicapping relies heavily on what they categorize as immature mechanisms, like acting out or passive aggression, or ego mechanisms, like rationalizing harmful behavior. But here is the critical warning. As flawlessly as the casino works in the moment, it comes at a profoundly steep long-term cost.
Right, because you can't live in a rigged casino forever. Eventually, reality catches up with you. What happens to the people who chronically claim handicaps?
From a social perspective, it destroys your reputation. Over time, claiming handicaps trains everyone around you to view you as fragile, sickly, and unreliable. If you are always so overwhelmed, or if you miraculously get a headache right before every major project, management notices. They stop giving you the projects. They stop trusting you.
You slowly bench yourself.
Exactly. But the internal cost is even worse. Dr. Gray's CUNY study deeply examined the emotional fallout of these behaviors. The participants who regularly engaged in self-sabotage didn't just stay stagnant. They suffered from intense, chronic rumination, profound regret, deep resentment toward their peers who did succeed, and a pervasive sense of shame.
Man.
It's a short-term ego protection strategy that practically guarantees long-term misery. You save face today, but you slowly suffocate your potential for tomorrow.
Which brings us to the most important part of this entire deep dive. You are listening to this right now, and you are likely recognizing these patterns in yourself.
Oh, definitely.
The late-night doom scrolling before a big meeting, the sudden, inexplicable urge to pick a fight with your partner when the relationship is finally going perfectly, the subtle excuses you make when a new, terrifying opportunity lands in your lap. You are seeing the spongy brake pedal in your brain.
Yeah.
The crucial transition we need to make right now, with the time we have left, is how do we fix it? We know the biology. We know the behavior. How do we bypass that broken brake pedal, dismantle these defense mechanisms, and bridge the massive gap between our intentions and our actions?
Well, rewiring the brain's prediction machine takes conscious, deliberate, and often uncomfortable practice, but the clinical strategies we have are highly effective. We can break this down into 4 actionable steps to bridge that gap.
Okay, let's hear them.
Step 1 is cognitive diffusion. When the amygdala hijack happens, when that wave of panic hits because you just got good news, you cannot just sit blindly in the emotion. You have to move the emotion out of the driver's seat.
How do you do that?
You do this by externalizing the thought. You write it down, but you must frame it objectively. Instead of thinking, I'm going to fail at this new job, you write down, I am having the thought that I will fail at this new job.
Oh, I like that. It
Yeah,
sounds like a tiny semantic difference, but you are essentially creating space. You're creating distance between you and the fear. You are observing the thought as a piece of passing data rather than adopting it as a truth about your identity.
precisely. You are switching on the prefrontal cortex to observe the amygdala, which immediately lowers the physiological panic.
Okay, what's step two?
Once you have a little bit of distance, we move to step 2. Bypassing the brake pedal. We know your RIFG brake is soft and spongy, so relying on sheer willpower to just push through will fail. You have to trick the brain. For the perfectionists who are paralyzed by fear of starting a project, clinical psychology recommends paradoxical intention. Specifically, a technique I love called the bad draft protocol.
I love this one. When I read this in the notes, it felt like an absolute cheat code for the human brain. How does the bad draft protocol work mechanically?
Let's say you have to write a major proposal and your brain is terrified it won't be perfect, so you are paralyzed. You sit down and you intentionally make your goal to write the absolute worst, most embarrassing, incoherent garbage draft possible for 20 straight minutes. You give yourself explicit permission to be awful.
But why does that work? Why wouldn't the brain just panic more?
Because of the prediction machine. When your stated goal is to produce garbage, the amygdala starts ringing the alarm. Why? Because you cannot possibly fail at making garbage. There is no threat to your ego, no risk of falling short. You bypass the threat response entirely, the pressure evaporates, and you simply start taking action. And usually, once you start, momentum takes over, and it's not actually garbage.
It's brilliant. You are sneaking past your own security guards. Okay, so that's for the perfectionists. What about the people who physically self-handicap? The procrastinators who avoid the desk entirely.
For behavioral procrastinators, the strategy is the WHOP method. It stands for Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. The critical part of this is identifying the specific obstacle that derails you and creating an if-then statement to bypass it.
Give me an example.
For example, if I walk through the front door after work, then I will immediately put my phone in a drawer for 1 hour.
So you are preloading the decision. You make the choice when you are calm, so you don't have to rely on that spongy willpower brake pedal when you are tired and stressed.
Yeah. Exactly. You are automating the positive behavior. Now that helps us bypass the broken brake. But eventually, we need to actually fix the brake itself, right? We need to repair the neurobiology. That brings us to step 3, strengthening the brake pedal. And this involves a highly clinical technique called urge surfing.
Okay, walk me through this, because reading about urge surfing honestly sounded agonizing. What is it, and how does it heal the brain?
Urge surfing is how you build the physiological muscle of your right inferior frontal gyrus. Let's say you are working on a hard task and the physical heat of the urge to sabotage hits you. It's that overwhelming, itching desire to open a new browser tab, check social media, go to the fridge, or just walk away from the desk.
I know that feeling all too well.
We all do. Normally, you cave immediately to relieve the tension. With urge surfing, you don't fight the urge, but you strictly do not act on it either. You sit there, you track the intensity of the urge out of 10, and you simply ride the wave of the physical sensation for 20 minutes.
I have to be completely honest with you. That sounds like psychological torture. Sitting at a desk for 20 minutes just staring at the wall while your brain is literally screaming at you and dumping adrenaline into your system to check your email.
I completely validate that reaction. It is highly, highly uncomfortable. But you must get comfortable with extreme discomfort if you want to undo these deeply ingrained defense mechanisms. Urge surfing is essentially exposure therapy for your own impulses.
Okay.
Think about what is happening on a neuroplastic level. By sitting there and not acting, you are literally training your brain. You are proving to your primitive amygdala that experiencing an unfulfilled urge will not kill you. The wave of panic will peak and it will eventually crash, and you will still be sitting there perfectly safe.
Wow.
Every single time you successfully surf an urge without caving, the neural pathway of your RIFG brake pedal gets a little thicker, a little faster, and a little firmer.
You are lifting weights with your frontal lobe. You are proving to your body that a feeling is just a feeling, not a command.
Beautifully said. Which leads us to the final piece of the puzzle. Step 4. Closing the gap and calibrating the baseline. This is how we permanently teach the prediction machine that success, visibility, and power are actually safe environments.
How do we calibrate it? Because right now, the baseline thinks average is safe and excellent is dangerous.
You recalibrate it through behavioral experiments. You have to gather new data to prove the old baseline wrong. For example, you intentionally send a project to a colleague when it is only 80% done and ask for feedback.
Which would normally trigger a perfectionist's amygdala to explode.
Yes,
Yeah.
but you do it anyway to gather the external data. When your colleague replies with helpful notes instead of mocking you, you prove to your brain that being in progress does not mean being incompetent. The world doesn't end when you aren't perfect. You also practice what clinical psychologists call reattribution. You have to actively, consciously change your internal definition of a mistake. Instead of internalizing a failure and saying, I failed, therefore I am an idiot, you train yourself to immediately reframe it. This didn't work. This is just neutral data I can learn from.
And doing this in a community helps too, right? I know in Dr. Pauline Rose Clance's original interventions for imposter syndrome back in the 80s, she found that group support was the most crucial element of recovery.
Absolutely. Because remember, one of the core drivers of this fear is the isolation of greatness, the fear of xenophobic rejection. When you get in a room with other high achievers and realize you aren't the only one feeling like a terrified fraud, the power of the fear instantly diminishes.
That makes total sense.
You fulfill that need for affiliation while still pursuing success. You can actively reframe cognitive distortions together. Instead of letting your brain default to, I might fail, you consciously, vocally pivot to, I have the capacity to do well. You are systematically, day by day, shrinking the gap between your low internal baseline and your high external reality.
Okay, let's step back and bring this all together. We have covered a massive amount of psychological and biological ground in this deep dive. You came into this conversation knowing exactly what that terrible dropping feeling in your stomach is when good news arrives. Now, you know the mechanics of why it's happening.
Yeah.
You've learned that holding yourself back is not a fundamental flaw in your character. It doesn't mean you are broken or weak. It is simply an evolutionary misfire. Your brain's prediction machine, doing its best to keep you alive, simply prefers the predictable, familiar pain of failure over the terrifying, unmapped territory of success, power, and the potential isolation of greatness.
And you've seen exactly how this biological panic manifests in your behavior, whether it's the high achiever pulling the handbrake to avoid outshining their peers, or the perfectionist staying up until 3 a.m. to build a protective, zero-sum excuse for their fragile ego.
But more importantly, we've given you the clinical tools to fight back. You now have the blueprint. Cognitive diffusion to separate yourself from the fear, the bad draft protocol to sneak past the amygdala, the WOP method to automate your choices, and the admittedly agonizing but necessary practice of urge surfing. You have everything you need to rebuild that spongy brake pedal in your brain.
But before we wrap up, there's one final lingering idea I want to leave you with, an idea that synthesizes the true depth of the CUNY study and the psychological profiles we've spent this time exploring.
I'm ready.
If self-sabotage is deeply biologically rooted in our fear of being envied, if it is driven by our desperate primal need to maintain our social bonds and not outshine our peers, then our collective mediocrity is actually an unspoken social contract. We subconsciously agree to stay small, to hide our gifts, and to play down our potential, simply to keep everyone around us comfortable. We are mutually agreeing not to trigger each other's insecurities.
Wow. We stay small so other people don't feel bad about themselves.
Yes. And this raises an incredibly important question. Perhaps the ultimate question for you to mull over as you step away from this deep dive and back into your actual life. Who are you really protecting when you hide your potential? And are you finally willing to break that invisible social contract to see what you are truly capable of?
You're staring at the email. It's the promotion you've been working toward for 3 years. The salary is higher. The title is exactly what you wanted. Your stomach drops. But this time you know exactly why. And this time you reply.